The other day, I was sitting around the house doing nothing. Maybe I was on my computer or something, but all of a sudden, it hit me. Metaphorically, it hit me. It's time. It's time to reread Throne of Glass. Bubbly. Now, I know what you're thinking. Dude, you've been saying you're gonna reread Throne of Glass for months now. Why haven't you done it yet? And I know, I have been saying that. I've been wanting to reread it, but it hasn't felt like the right time. And it needs to feel like the right time. You get it. You get the point. Anyway, I'm gonna reread Throne of Glass. So for those of you that are unfamiliar, Throne of Glass has 8 books in the series. I guess sort of 7 books and a prequel. The prequel is The Assassin's Blade. Then comes book 1, which is Throne of Glass. Then Crown of Midnight, Heir of Fire, Queen of Shadows, Empire of Storms, Tower of Dawn, and Kingdom of Ash. There are approximately 5,000 pages depending on the print edition that you have. So if you need a little bit of history on it, Throne of Glass was actually initially published on Fiction Press, which was a website way back when where people could just publish their own writing and their own stories. It was kind of like a Wattpad, but it was sort of like the Craigslist of Wattpad, where the site itself was honestly archaic. It was crazy. It was, to my knowledge, one of the first platforms where people would be posting their stories, and anybody can post a story, whether it is good or bad. So Throne of Glass was actually published on Fiction Press back in 2002 or 2003. That's over 20 years ago. I think it was initially published under the title Queen of Glass, and Sarah J. Maas wrote it when she was like 15 or 16. So it was a long time ago, and apparently the book has significantly changed since then, and the series as a whole. I don't know how many books ended up on Fiction Press, but I think it was maybe 2 or 3. And then in 2008, everything came down from Fiction Press because she had gotten her publishing deal and was rewriting the books to be published. That history alone is so fascinating to me, and I don't think a lot of people talk about it. And I know there's a lot of original fans that read Throne of Glass or Queen of Glass, whatever it was under, when it was initially on Fiction Press, and it has supposedly changed pretty drastically. I guess there are some people that maybe don't like the direction that the series went in, which is super fascinating to me, and I want to do some more research about what that initial story was. But for all intents and purposes, it is what it is now. So after it was taken off Fiction Press in 2008, there were 4 years before the first book, Throne of Glass, was actually published. So it came out in 2012, which again is a really long time ago. We're talking over a decade at this point. And Sarah J. Maas was still super, super young when that initially got published. And yes, she did change a lot of the story, but I have to imagine that a lot of the key writing styles have stayed the same since then. So my history with reading Throne of Glass is actually very interesting as well. I went back on my Goodreads profile to see my reading dates of the last time that I read the story, and crazy enough, I actually have reading dates for Throne of Glass even before I read the entire series. I read the full series in January of 2023, so pretty much exactly 2 years ago I read all of Throne of Glass. But according to my Goodreads profile, I actually read the first book in 2018. I gotta tell you, I have no recollection of that. I don't remember anything about that book. I don't remember owning the book. I bought the series the first time that I was reading it with those horrible covers that I'm so glad have changed. And even when I was reading it back in 2023, there was nothing familiar about the story to me. So that was a little bit interesting. I guess technically I've read the first book 3 times now. All that to say, the last time I read this series was back in 2023, 2 years ago. And I was hesitant to pick it up the first time, even though I was a pretty big ACOTAR fan at that point. That was the first real series that I went through of her work. I loved ACOTAR, and I got introduced to ACOTAR through the internet, as a lot of people have, and it's a fun time. I think that it's gone through the waves of hype, and you have all these people that love it over here, and you have all these people that hate it over here, but you also have people over here that just love to hate it just because they want to be controversial, which is an entirely other topic. There's issues with it. It's not a perfect series, but it's fun, and I really, really enjoy it. So I was a huge fan of ACOTAR, and as I was getting more involved on Bookstagram and Instagram and everything like that, everybody just talks about Throne of Glass, and everybody says that Throne of Glass is a better series than ACOTAR, although there's not a ton of information about revenue and sales, but it is theorized that ACOTAR is a much better selling series than Throne of Glass, and yet everybody kind of says Throne of Glass is just better overall. There's a lot of division there. It's interesting. I am not sure where I land right now because Throne of Glass isn't as fresh in my mind, but I think maybe by the end of my reread I'll be able to hopefully make some sort of verdict. I don't know. So I read ACOTAR, and then I finally was just like, you know what? Screw it. Let's do it. Let's pick up Throne of Glass. Which brings me to my first read of this book. or the first read that I remember of this book at least. And I gotta tell you, I didn't really like it that much, especially coming off of ACOTAR, which again, there's problems with it, but I think that at least if you're comparing the first book of Throne of Glass and maybe the last book of ACOTAR, which is what I would have come off of, the writing in this book is much weaker. It felt like you just take a giant step down as far as the writing quality, and that was very abrupt for me and very confusing for me. I really didn't want to keep reading it. And then I kind of learned a little bit more of the history, how it was initially published on Fiction Press, how she was so young when she wrote it, and it's really her first book. And I was like, okay, we just gotta power through it, we gotta do it. Let's just get through the series and see what all the hype is about. But I will say, I didn't love this book. And the second book as well, Crown of Midnight, wasn't the biggest fan of that too. But once you hit book 3, I was fully signed up. It was 5 stars, I think, the rest of the series from what I remember at my first read. I became completely obsessed with it. I binged every single one. And because I read it so fast and so close together, now I actually don't really remember a lot of the series, especially the later books, which are actually the ones that I read the most recently. I just don't remember things. There's some little snippets of scenes that I can kind of recall, but for the most part, it's just gone. It's out of my memory. So I am very, very excited to start this reread because I'm going to take my time a bit more. I want to slow down, not necessarily binge it and skim read as much as I think I might have been the first time that I read it. Try to get every detail that I possibly can and maybe look at it with a little bit more of a critical eye versus an emotional one from maybe the first time that I was reading it. Because I'm just curious, what attracted me so much to it the first time that I read it, and where do I stand on the ACOTAR versus Throne of Glass scale? So it's gonna be really fun. Oh my gosh. So these are the books in publication order. That's a lot. That's a lot of pages. This is like 5,000 pages right here. It's crazy. I think that Kingdom of Ash is still the longest book that I've ever read in my life. It is so close to being 1,000 pages that it's actually kind of infuriating that it's not 1,000 pages. I would have taken 20 pages of fluff just to be able to say that I had read a 1,000-page book. So as I'm starting this reading vlog, I actually have reread the first 2 books already. I finished Throne of Glass at the end of December, and I chugged through Crown of Midnight a couple days ago to get through it. So I'm gonna kind of give my review on these first 2 books before moving on to the ones that I haven't reread yet. As a disclaimer, this will be a spoiler-free reading vlog, although I am going to name some characters or name some scenarios. I will not reveal anything about the plots of the books moving forward, but I'm not just going to be silent about every other book past the first one. There are things that I have to talk about or else this video wouldn't really exist. So you won't get any plot details, you won't get any spoilers. You may get names of future characters, if that makes sense. On my reread of this book, Throne of Glass, we follow our main character, Celaena Sardothian. She is the world's greatest assassin, and we open up and she's in basically prison, but it's a prison that makes you work in the salt mines. And this kingdom that she's in, they send rebels there, they send criminals there, and they spend the rest of their days working off their crimes. But most of them, the average lifespan is like 1 month to 1 year. It is not the best living conditions or working conditions. So she is there because she is the world's best assassin and she's killed a bunch of people and she's a criminal to the crown, basically. However, she gets pulled out of the salt mines and taken back to the kingdom to compete in these games to be the king of that realm's champion, basically his personal assassin. So that's kind of what this book follows and what we're going through. I have to say, I actually liked it just a smidgen more than the first time that I read the book. Just a little bit more. Not much. I'm talking like half of a star here. But I did like it more. Here's some things I didn't like about it. The exclamation points. I think that really shows the maturity of the writing when you go back and read a book that in all dialogue, just all the time, there's just exclamation points flying around like nobody's business. And that is one of my biggest reading pet peeves. They're just completely unnecessary. The all caps, the exclamation points, it feels very, very dramatic and kind of cringy. That's definitely something that I didn't love. Another thing that I think is important to note is that if you are not in the mood for this type of book, you're going to to hate it. You have to be in the mood for it. You have to know what you're getting into. You have to know that it's very over the top. It's probably going to be ridiculously cringy at times, but if you're able to sort of accept that and try to enjoy it for what it is, that was easier for me this time because I knew what I was getting into. I knew that this was going to be a step down from everything else, and that sort of allowed me to enjoy it just a little bit more than maybe the first time. So I appreciate it. I think it is a great foundation setting book, and even knowing certain things and certain twists that are coming in later books, you kind of start to pick up and see some of the little Easter eggs that SJM left, where the first time you're reading it, you could never predict something like that, but now you're kind of seeing some of the Easter eggs, and it's interesting. It's very fun. I think that part was done pretty well. So this was still pretty much what I was expecting, maybe liked it a little bit more. Overall, kind of mediocre and very cringy, but still enjoyable. You like it. You know, it's not great, but it's good. And then I moved into Crown of Midnight. This one I read super fast, and I honestly think that a lot of my points from the first book apply to this book. I still think that the dialogue is pretty rudimentary. I still think that there aren't a lot of complex plot things happening or crazy things with our characters that are developing them. It's still pretty just surface level and stagnant. We don't know a ton about all of our characters yet, although we do see some relationships develop. There's a little bit more romance in this one, which I did enjoy. I think that it was maybe like sitting at a 2 for the beginning of the book. Maybe it got bumped up to like a 3 around the middle as things started to intensify a bit. And then when something happens in this, something blows up, not literally, but emotionally, everything is blown up. I was riveted. I was fully in it. I was attached to the characters and what they were going through in the moment. And I didn't really remember a lot about that. And I remember reading it and being like, oh, this happens. Actually, I think this is being written really well. Like, we're on a good track here. I think this is going to end in a great way. And I have to say, the like final reveal and the way that the antagonist ends up being handled, I actually didn't really like. The ending is a little bit out of left field. I feel like you're on this wild goose chase for a long time of like, yeah, we may have our really, really big bad guy that is probably going to be the bad guy for the whole series, but you also have to deal with the little bad guys throughout the rest of the plot line, or else you're just going to get bored. You have to have those antagonists that kind of anchor you to the plot point. That was very kept under wraps. It wasn't being revealed. Everything was super mysterious. But then all of a sudden, we go through this whole journey with Selena, our main character, and crazy things happen to her, really emotional things and development on her side as a character. And then all of a sudden you get to like the final battle or the final conflict, and it's just kind of like this guy pops up and is like, blah, I'm the bad guy. So I don't know. I think that the ending just was a little bit lackluster. So book 1, I liked more than the first time I read it. Book 2, I think I liked less than the first time that I read it because maybe I wasn't quite as emotionally charged while reading it. I definitely was at certain points, but I think the ending I was able to maybe look at a little bit more objectively. Just the pacing was weird. It just felt a little bit weird. I didn't love it. So those are the first 2 books. And now I remember from my first read through going to Heir of Fire next, and Heir of Fire just completely sets off the series for me. I love it past that point. However, I never read Assassin's Blade, which is the prequel book. I don't know why I didn't read it. I do know why I didn't read it. It's because I don't really care about prequels. I have a very hard time wanting to read them, especially if I've already gone through a chunk of the story, because I don't want to go backwards in time. I don't want to maybe read something that I feel like isn't necessarily vital to the current plot that I'm in, so I skipped it. And also, this is actually 5 novellas. It's not even like the full story, and so I think that turned it off for me as well, because not in a bad way, maybe in a bad way. I don't mean this as harshly as I'm going to say it, but it kind of felt like it was going to be a waste of time for me. So I just skipped it and went straight from Crown of Midnight to Heir of Fire. This time, I gotta read Assassin's Blade. There is a lot of discourse about where to read this book in the series. You can read it basically first, second, third, or even sometimes people read it 4th. I'm gonna read it in 3rd place because that is actually the publication date. This came out as the 3rd book, and also a lot of people say that the best way to read it is in 3rd place. Another thing that I'm slightly concerned about, on top of it being a prequel and being novellas, the 3rd thing that I think is maybe affecting me right now is that she's gonna be super young in this book. I think she's 16. In the other books, she's also very young. I think she turns 18 in Throne of Glass. And it's kind of difficult for me to relate to the main character that is 16, but not only that, a main character that is 16 and being heralded as the best assassin in the world, and she's da 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 da, and she's so scary and intimidating, and she can take down 10 grown men with her bare hands. It's just kind of hard for me to jump on board with. So I have a little bit of concern about that, but we're gonna push through it. We're gonna read this for the first time. I'm excited. I'm nervous. I'm gonna try to keep an open mind. I do know, obviously, what happens to one of the other main characters in this book just because of reading the rest of the series and also everything that I've seen online. So there's not really anything that's going to be a surprise or a twist to me, but I'm curious if I will get as emotional as a lot of other people seem to get over this book. So it is currently the weekend and I don't have to do any work and my husband is out of town and I have so much time that I need to fill, and so I expect to finish this very quickly. Let's just jump right into it. Okay, I've made some good headway. I finished the first novella and I am into the second novella now. I'm about 80 pages into the book and I have some thoughts. I'm gonna keep ruminating on them for a little bit though. I think I'm gonna make some tea and then keep reading the second novella and then maybe we can chat about it a little bit. Okay, so we are 2 stories in at this point out of the 5 novellas in The Assassin's Blade. The first one is The Assassin and the Pirate Lord, and the second one that I read was The Assassin and the Healer. So The Assassin and the Pirate Lord, I'm not sure I loved. I definitely liked it, and it is a good introduction to Sam, who is the other main character in this book, and he is an assassin that works with Selena in the Assassin's Guilds that she's kind of raised in, that we've heard a lot about from the first 2 books. So we meet Sam in this first story, and I'm not gonna say a lot more because this particular story relates to not things that have already happened in book 1 and book 2, but things that I know are going to happen in some following books, so I'm not really gonna talk about the plot. The character of Selena kind of met my expectations in that she's kind of annoying in this one. She's very young, she's 16, but kind of tries to put on this persona of being much, much older and much more experienced, and she's not. And for a lot of the story, it was hard to believe that she was as good as she says that she is, and she's as good as everybody else says that she is. But I will say there are some moments at the end where SJM writes her kind of proving herself, and you get to see her be more skilled and live up to her name a little bit more. So I did appreciate that, and I thought it was done in a believable way, at least as believable as you can make it in a book like this. Again, this kind of falls into the category of you gotta be in the mood for this because it is so over the top. If you're not in the mood, it's gonna read as cringy instead of cool and exciting. I think I was in a good spot for it though, but I did recognize a couple times like, Okay, that was interesting. So that was the first one. And then The Assassin and the Healer, I really, really liked. That one was very short. I think it's probably going to be the shortest story in this book, but it also introduces a character that is coming in later books, so I'm not going to say who that is, but I loved it. It was so kind of sweet. You see Selena in a pretty low, dark place. Out of that darkness, she actually is able to help someone. And honestly, it's really the first time that you see a different side of her being more compassionate and standing on some morals, where you've heard her talk about all of these morals in the last story, in the last couple of books, but you haven't really seen necessarily the example of that. You kind of have, but maybe not in a smaller way that makes it feel like it's actually a core value of hers and part of who she is as a person. Whereas here, I feel like it actually develops Selena a lot in a way that's really important and really helpful as we move forward. So I really, really liked that one. It kind of had me smiling. Oh, it was just super cute. So the next story that we're reading, it's like 120 pages in, and it is The Assassin and the Desert. I'm trying to decide if I just want to keep powering through. We're like midday at this point, and honestly, I feel like if I really pushed myself, I could probably finish it today. I don't know if I want to finish it today, but I probably could. I'm just gonna keep going. All right, it is the next day. I read 2 more of the novellas in The Assassin's Blade, so I've now read 4 out of 5. The 2 that I read yesterday was The Assassin and the Desert and The Assassin and the Underworld. I really, really liked The Assassin in the Desert. I think we got some super good character development for Selena specifically. You got to see kind of a new side to her. It's a direct continuation, I guess, chronologically from The Assassin and the Healer, which is the second story in the book. And so she's still kind of in a pretty dark spot going into the Red Desert. But we get to see a new side of her where she sort of has to pick herself up again out of this dark place. She can't really rely on that cockiness or confidence that we've seen from her in previous stories, but also in Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight, the first 2 books, which I really liked because I think that Selena in these first couple of books is pretty infuriating sometimes. Like, she just bugs me because I just feel like there's so much immaturity there. I've said it before, but it's hard for me to like her and it's hard for me to follow her throughout all of these stories. But The Assassin in the Desert, I really, really started to see some of those character traces that I think pop up in the way later books in the series that I really like and appreciate. So that was good. You also get some glimpses into some relationships that are formed and some other characters that I know are coming later on, and I liked getting their backstory. So loved that one. The Assassin in the Underworld was fine. I liked it, but there wasn't a lot for me to write home about. I think that there were some important things that helped clarify some stuff later on in the books, specifically with one particular character that Selena has a rough relationship with. When we meet this character later on in the books, you don't really know what has gone down between them and what their deal is, but you do get to see some of the backstory in this, and so I did like that part of it, but honestly, The Assassin in the Underworld wasn't my favorite out of the stories. So the last one I'm gonna finish right now is The Assassin in the Empire. I know what's coming, but we gotta go through it, we gotta plow through it, and hope our hearts don't get too battered and bruised in the process. Let's finish this thing. Okay, I get it. I get why you guys like it so much. This book was so good. This book was so much better than I thought it was gonna be. I don't even know how to start talking about it. Okay. All right, so like I explained at the beginning of this video, this is actually 5 novellas, which I thought that I was not going to like. Hi. Hello. Sit. Yeah. Just I thought that I wasn't going to like the novella structure of the book, but the way that it ended up being written and the stories that SJM chose to write were perfect. She did such a good job with it. I think my initial assumptions about Selena being 16 in this book were kind of right. At least in the beginning, it was a little bit hard for me to get on board with her as a character. She honestly wasn't very likable to me because she's super young, she's super immature, and I guess that is good character writing because she would be acting like that if she was really 16 and had the background that she had. But it made it a little bit hard for me to actually enjoy her, and I want to be able to enjoy the main character. So I felt that a lot in the first one, where she's just immature, super brazen, super cocky, super selfish as well, but it really did play into how the rest of the book formed and how the rest of the novellas ended up taking shape. I just loved it. I loved it. I loved the stories that we got to see. I loved how it played in with a lot of the stuff that Selena had been kind of dropping hints about in the first two books. Like, she'll say an offhanded comment about, oh yeah, one time I stole this horse and blah 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 blah, and it's not talked about anymore after that, but then you get that story in here. Or another time she's like, yeah, I went and I trained with this other group of assassins, and nothing else is explained about it in the first two books, and then you get that story here. So it really does tie in a way that is super cool, and it kept me interested. It wasn't just like completely random things that we had never heard of, we had no emotional ties to. There were enough Easter eggs that were dropped in the first two books where I was totally signed up for this, totally in for it. And obviously we have really the main part of this book, which is the relationship that Selena talks about a lot in the first two books, and what ended up happening and what ended up going down, and what ended up sending her to the salt mines where we meet her at the very beginning of book one. So I thought it was done really well. I got emotional over it. I didn't think that I would. I think that SJM is very good at describing a character's pain, which I don't know what that says about a person, but it felt real, it felt raw, it felt genuine and very earned. That's the thing, is I hate it when an author tries to pull on your emotions and play with your emotions without actually earning it with the rest of the story that they'd written. And this felt very earned, which is probably why I got so emotional over it. Another thing that I ended up really enjoying about this is just how it felt like Selena was just going on a bunch of side quests. A couple years ago when it first came out, I played Hogwarts Legacy on the PS5. It took up a lot of my life for many months. I absolutely loved it. Played it so much, but you can obviously go through the main quest and then you have a bunch of side quests as well that you can go on just kind of for fun. And this totally felt like that to me, where we have our main quest of Throne of Glass all the way through Kingdom of Ash, and then just like 2 books in, for our 3rd book, SJM just drops in like, hey, here's a bunch of side quests just to like have a little fun. And I liked that a lot. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I'm surprised by how much I enjoyed this, and I'm really glad that I read it 3rd. I obviously can't speak to reading it 1st or 2nd or 4th, but I would put my recommendation on putting it 3rd. It felt like all of the ties came together, everything made sense. It was just great. So it's time to move on to Heir of Fire, which is the book that I remember the most because I felt like it really is the book that solidified how much I liked this series. This is what started it all. I was getting pretty fatigued and burnt out on the first 2 books, and I remember starting this one and being like, if this one is anyone like the first 2, like, we need to pick it up here. We need to pick it up or else I'm gonna lose interest. This picks it up. We're good. We meet some new characters in this book that I won't mention right now, but I might mention at the end of it, and I'm just really excited. I honestly still don't remember a ton of the plot. I don't remember a ton of what the conflicts are that we go through, but there are some key scenes that I remember reading and being super, super stoked about. So this one is when it starts to get kind of thick too. This one is 562 pages, so it's going to take me a bit longer to get through it, but I'm pretty confident that we can crush through it pretty fast. So let's go, let's do it. Ugh, I'm barely into it. I'm like less than 100 pages into it right now, and I am starting to remember how much I absolutely love this book. It feels so different to the other ones because book 1 and 2 and the prequel just focus on Selena. Like, you are following her the entire time. But this book, the storylines start to split a bit, and we're following a bunch of different perspectives in a bunch of different locations as well. So we're not just in Rifthold, we're not just at the Glass Castle, we are across this kingdom and this globe, basically. We get introduced to the witches, and that I remember being probably one of my favorite storylines in the entire series. I'm so excited. I love seeing where Selena is right now, and then some of the other plot lines that are continuing to develop. This book specifically makes me appreciate how it is in third person and not first person like ACOTAR. It kind of allows us to jump in between a bunch of different perspectives, but you don't really feel that switch as much because it's the same writing style. We're not necessarily in characters' heads, we're more just kind of at a bird's eye view observing them, and I really, really liked how SJM chose to do that instead of going with a first person perspective, because I think that the first 2 books, you would almost expect that. Like, for a YA novel following one singular character, the type of book that it is, I would expect it to be a first person perspective from Selena's viewpoint, and it's not. And I really like that. And honestly, it allows this book and the forthcoming books to just explode in scope, in scale. The story gets so huge and vast, and you would not be able to do that with a first person perspective. So I'm so excited for this book. I literally am getting giddy wanting to read it because I'm starting to remember all of the things that I liked about it. I'm starting to remember some of the storylines that are going to come into play. It's going to be amazing. I can't wait. Let's keep going. Okay, so I actually finished Heir of Fire last night. It's been a couple days. I have not been able to film reactions to the first half of the book kind of like I wanted to, and I just got ahead of myself and read. In the second half of the book, I wasn't really able to film reactions to that either because I was too emotional. I was crying so much in the back half of the book that I didn't really want to film it, and so I just ended up finishing it, and now we can talk about it. I feel like I kind of shared most of my thoughts at the beginning of this section just because I'm not sharing a lot about plot details. We're still following Selena, but we're also following a couple different characters in their stories as well, because she is removed from sort of the first couple characters that you meet in the first 2 books. We also get a new sect of characters in the witches that is really fun to follow. I love that plot line so much. We meet Rowan finally. Thank God for Rowan. What a good addition to this book. I truly don't know how to process, honestly. I remember crying in this book the first time that I read it, and I remember one specific part that I was crying at, but I don't remember feeling this emotional over it. For me personally, the Throne of Glass series starts with this book. Not literally, because you do have to have the beginning 2 books, and the prequel is helpful and kind of nice, but it really starts emotionally for me. My investment, it starts in Heir of Fire. I am so signed up for the rest of the series now. This is it. This is a 5-star read for me. It had me smiling, it had me laughing, it had me crying, it had me scared for these characters. The action is so well written, the conflicts are so well written. Selena goes through such good character development in this, and I've said it before, I'm absolutely a character reader. The way that SJM treats Selena's character in this, it's so good because she has to go through a lot of growth in this book. Emotionally, physically, training, she has to completely change from the last book. I so appreciate how much time SJM took with that process, because I think that there are books where the main character has to go through this training period or this growth period and they just sort of zoom past it, and then you get to the end of it and they're a totally different person and you're like, no, that didn't feel super earned. But with this, once you get to the end of of the book and some of the decisions that Celaena resolves to make, her morals, her values, everything feels earned by that point. And you are so signed up for her as a character, which is really the first time that I personally feel it. She's kind of annoying to me in the other books. And I'm just waiting to get to this point where she is just totally broken down and has to be rebuilt as a character. And I love it. And I think it was done really, really well. This book to me is Avengers assembled. In your own plot lines, in your separate POVs and your own chapters, Avengers assemble. That's how I feel about this. I'm so excited for the rest of the series. So that is the first 4 books done in the Throne of Glass series. This read through has solidified for me that Assassin's Blade has to be read third. It has to be read third. It makes the book so much better. It makes certain things that happen in Heir of Fire specifically so much better. I can't imagine reading Assassin's Blade fourth personally. It just doesn't make sense to me. And even first, I feel like you wouldn't care about Assassin's Blade that much if you didn't have the first 2 books. So that is the perfect order. The publication order is the way to go. Definitely read a third. We are halfway through, I guess by book count, but by page count, we are not halfway through. This is really where the meat of the series is. And to be honest, I don't remember a lot about the rest of the books. The book that I remember the most is Tower of Dawn, I think. This one. I don't remember anything in Queen of Shadows. I don't remember anything in Empire Storms. I do remember quite a bit in Kingdom of Ash, but remembering quite a bit in Kingdom of Ash is only remembering like a quarter of it because it's almost an 1,000-page book. But Tower of Dawn I actually remember pretty well. My plan is actually to do a reading tandem between Tower of Dawn and Empire of Storms. I'm going to read them together. I didn't do this the last time I read the book, and like everybody else, I found myself getting kind of bored with Tower of Dawn. There's definitely some good things that happen in it from what I remember, but it's definitely near the bottom of the list as far as my favorites go in the series. However, I'm super curious how that is going to change when I read them at the same time. There's a bunch of different guides or plans that you can follow that tell you, okay, read this many chapters in Empire of Storms, now switch to Tower of Dawn, read 5 more chapters of that, and you can bounce back and forth because they are following 2 different characters and 2 different areas in the world, but they're happening at the same time. So it's still the same kind of like thread tying everything together. So I'm excited for that. Queen of Shadows is next. Truly, I don't remember much about this book, so I'm really stoked to get into that. And I don't want to jump the gun, but after reading Heir of Fire and I was thinking about it, I've never gotten so emotional in ACOTAR. There's a couple of moments that maybe made me tear up, but nothing like Heir of Fire, which is only the 4th book in this series. We have so much to go through. Again, I'm not jumping the gun, but as of right now, it's really hard to believe that I won't end this reread thinking that Throne of Glass is better than ACOTAR. But we'll see, only time will tell. So we're gonna stop there. This is part 1 of me reading the Throne of Glass series, because if I did it all in one video, it would be super long. So we're gonna split it into 2 parts, which will be coming soon. As always, thank you so much for watching and hanging out with me on this corner of the internet, and we'll see you next time.